nation.
Marketing is the mission, selling, not telling. On one level, this whole spectacle is presented as a triumph of democracy, as if the candidate who wins will run the country. But being in office doesn't necessarily mean being in power. Americans believe they are determining their future. Are they? Do most know, or are they ever told who rules America?
I just think that these people, you can't really see them.
Yeah?
That's what I think.
The people who rule America?
People are behind the screen. They are behind the screen.
Invisible.
To the general public.
And do you think people really know what's going on?
To some extent, yes, and to some extent, no.
To what extent yes, to what extent no?
About 50-50.
What's up,
Who rules America? There's no one right answer. Pulitzer Prize-winning American historian Eric Foner says it's a question that raises many more questions about power that works from the shadows.
some new speakers.
Who rules America? You know, there's no one single easily defined group who rules America, but I think, you know, not just now, but I think for a couple of generations, we have had what the sociologist C. Wright Mills called in the 1950s a power elite, an interlocking set of connections of people in business, in politics, in the military, who pretty much determine the parameters of possible change. It's not that they rule America in a conspiratorial way. And of course, there are elected officials, but the leeway of those officials is constrained by what you might call the permanent government. Presidents come and go, but there's a kind of permanent establishment, what, you know, President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, but now it's more a military-financial complex. That really, you know, as I say, determines the limits.
Oh, and also on top of the ad on the
forum, a gathering of progressive intellectuals and scholars and students.
You'll see that white
here in New York City.
That leads to the bus, the top of the roof.
They don't agree on everything,
and it's a
but they do agree that America is not the democracy it claims to be. They all want to know who rules America.
The amp.
Professor Stanley Aronowitz writes about the research of this man, C. Wright Mills, who a half-century ago wrote about the existence of a power elite that activists today refer to as the 1%, the people who run things.
His contribution to understanding the nature of power in America is in the first place to identify three institutional orders that really together form the power elite. An elite that is generally speaking unresponsive to the people, unresponsive to democratic liberties and democratic procedures. And he said the three groups were the corporate capitalist institutions, the military, and the third one was the top layer of the political directors, he called them, and they are the national leaders, like the executive branch of government, not even Congress. Congress was in the middle levels of power. It doesn't really share the decision to make war, the major economic policies and so on. It participates at some level, but basically it's out of power. And he said that really has undercut the whole pretense of progressive and of representative government.
This may be why in recent surveys, only 7 to 9% of the American people in both parties believe that the Congress, the so-called People's House of Government, is representative and capable of solving the country's problems. If politicians are trapped in a polarized and highly partisan stalemate, who does exercise the power to decide what the country's priorities and policies should be? We asked J.K. Fowler, an editor of The Mantle, a political magazine.
I think it's extremely complicated. I think there's not one
particular answer. I feel like this was the wake-up call
I think
that Americans should really touch.
Stuff going on in America right now is being run by moneyed interests in Washington. But I think there's a bubbling movement from the ground up as well that's happening.
Now, we, the people, need to wake up and understand what's going on.
I'm a strong believer that there's a class, in particular in New York City, where, but I don't think it's they're not hidden away in some room with nefarious deeds in mind. It's
Oh
more.
yeah. Well, I
It's
hope
more
so. We
structural.
do
There's
something
certain
and stop
clubs I go
being
to. There's certain
American
streets that
cowards.
they're interacting with
And
one another more.
I know a lot
We
of
put that
people don't
question
agree
to Erin
to
Crowell, a
the
30-year-old
American
working
flag to
class
be
mother
under
from a small
distress,
town in
but
Wisconsin
that's what
who was
we are.
working 2 jobs while pursuing her education. America, who rules America? What is your perception of that?
So, people that have the money and the resources to send a lobbyist to Washington, like nobody from my town could afford to send a lobbyist, and say, hey, Harley Davidson is, threatening to move their plants
the
to
world?
China unless, everybody
We the
takes
people.
pay cuts.
And it's such a
and
shame
literally shut our
that
town down,
Americans
We can't
are
afford to defend
so
ourselves.
embarrassed
Do
and
you
so
feel,
controlled
as an American citizen,
by
that you have
fear,
power? In our country,
because
do you
they
feel
are
as if you
so
have the
in
ability
love
to
with their
get
material
your
stuff. Their
dream
Gucci,
achieved?
their Prada, their vehicles,
I feel
their
like
homes,
it's
their
slipping
everything.
away.
And soon we're gonna lose all these things
I don't think I do.
just for having freedom of
because
speech.
It feels like the closer and closer I would get to
And
that,
I feel
like
that the
just a dream
American
for me
people
is to finish
should have
college,
took notice
and take care of
when
myself and
Donald
take care
Trump,
of my son, but
freedom of speech was taken away
even that
on the internet.
and I understand, like,
Where most people
a lot of people in my position aren't even able to
keep
get
in
that far
touch.
now.
So
And
if
Americans
the citizens who
were
are supposed
laughing
to be in
about it.
charge don't feel they are,
I'm
who
not for the
does?
guy, I'm
What
not
we found
against
is
the
that by
guy,
and large, it's
but
the
I'm just
wealthiest
saying
Americans who call the
that
shots
we should have
through
took notice
unelected
and should have said
institutions
no,
that drive
no,
agendas
no.
in their own
And I'll be
interest.
glad when people get off in the Facebook.
There may be
And I'll
a
be
cabal
glad when
running
people
things,
get
but
off
in
in
the
the
end, the
Instagram.
state
And let's
and the
all go to
system
Rumble.
emerges,
Let's all
argues
go to
Canadian
Rumble.
political
People
analyst
know
Leo
that Europe
Panich.
was trying to take
I
Rumble
don't think there's an external
offline.
force controlling the American
Why is
state.
that?
The American
They're
state
not going
is
after
capitalist
YouTube,
to its
but
core,
they're going after
in the very
Rumble.
way it's organized. It doesn't do it because there's too much influence from Wall Street.
I'll be
It does
creating
it
a
because it
Rumble
is structurally embedded with Wall Street. It doesn't do it because there's too much influence from a military-industrial
channel there
complex. It does it because the
soon.
military-industrial complex
Because
is
YouTube is
inside
getting
the
too
state,
controlling.
is funded
No
by
more
the state,
freedom of
is
speech.
part of the state.
Sure, there
And
are
I don't
people who
like to be
conspire and there's
controlled.
people who act in secret.
But check it out.
Capitalism is
This
not
is
a
the next
conspiracy.
one.
The people who have the wealth, they're not a
do y'all
conspiracy.
think?
We know who they are.
Let me know what you
We
think
know how
about
they
that
collect
one.
this money. They take it out of our pocket. They put it in theirs. And it's not a big mystery.
There seems to be corporate forces, in addition to Wall Street, that essentially help guide our political and economic direction.
Yeah, Micah, sorry.
Leading are America's top corporations. Political analyst Michael Clare has studied the political economy
heard
of
a few
oil
things
for 20 years and says a lack of media coverage keeps the public in the dark.
That was being
Does the
rude.
media cover it? The media doesn't cover this for the most part. In fact, the media is largely in
Thank you for
league
stopping
because
by, Mike,
of the
man.
advertising dollars that the oil and gas
If you want, I
lobby
could bring you
provides.
up.
They're
Let
very
me know.
heavily dependent
I'm
on
trying to learn how to do
advertising
this stuff
revenue,
on
so
there.
they're very careful in what
Be the
they
first
say.
person
Who are
to
they
look.
accountable to? Are there laws really controlling and regulating
Yeah,
what
let
they
me
do?
know what y'all think about the
There
first
are
few
laws,
flags.
but they have been
You
written
like it
largely
or
by
not?
their
Give me a 1 or
lobbyists
give me
to
a 2 if
favor
you don't
them.
like it.
So, in fact,
Right.
the laws, for the most part, are in their favor, not in the favor of most Americans.
Is there an issue where we've seen this very clearly, where the interests of the oil industry or the energy industry is in conflict with the interests of Americans?
Well, I would give an example that the oil industry has been pushing for drilling in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico and off the coast of Alaska, for example. And they get all kinds of tax benefits for that kind of deep water drilling. And they were able to do so during the Bush period with absolutely no...
Everyone who loves it and everyone.
Which brings us to another set of corporations, the media companies. Jeff Cohen has been in the media and written books about its impact in shaping how Americans think about their country and its system of power. He says media companies push propaganda for war.
It's the same exact media quoting the same exact experts that pushed our country and the world into a war with Iraq. And we were told by these media, oh, we're so sorry, we didn't know, we made a mistake. Next time we'll be more vigilant. But here we are next time, 10 years later, and the same media are blowing smoke about a weapons program in Iran that doesn't exist. There was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq either. And so we're hearing, it's like, when the war drums are beating, and I worked in mainstream television news in this country during the run-up to the Iraq War. When the war drums are beating, they don't let you put on opposing views. We tried to get opposing views that question the evidence, the intelligence that would justify an attack on Iraq, but we were kicked off the air. And now you're finding it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare that's happening again.
At the same time, most people who work in major media, and I of course did as well, don't believe this. They don't buy this. They feel like they do have the freedom to cover issues, and that the networks are much more diverse in their point of view than outsiders like you and maybe now me would say.
Well, the way to rebut that fiction is just to look at what happened in the wake of the Iraq invasion. Those of us who question the evidence that they were a weapons of mass destruction threat, we were totally right, and most of us got kicked out of the TV networks. The people who got it wrong have promoted up. So this idea of diversity in the mainstream media or good journalism will win out certainly hasn't been proven in the last 10 years, where the journalists who got it right have been punished, sanctioned, or kicked out of the media. And the journalists who got it wrong, most of them have more power today to blow smoke at Iran than they had even when they were blowing smoke at Iraq.
Those people, the people who own institutions, are usually very conscious of their power, not just as individuals, but as part of a dominant class, says independent TV producer Brian Drolet.
So there's a lot of talk here about Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, it's loud on the outside,
but
check it out when you go on the inside.
There's a lot of talk about, the rich versus the 99%, but it's kind of, there's a certain kind of amnesia about the structure of our society that at one point in this country at least had some currency. In the 30s and even in the 60s, you could talk about the working class. Nobody talks about the working class. It's all about there's a middle class and then there's the 1%. As if there's, and I guess then there's some, poor blacks and Latinos or something, right? And I think that word has been sanitized and scrubbed out of the vocabulary of the people of the United States, including out of the vocabulary of the left. Now, that's not the entire left, but even the people that use the word class don't seem to have the ability to phrase it in a way that actually means something.
I thought I'd put these visors here about the senior.
To talk about class is not to talk about a conspiracy, but a complex system that's evolved over the years. A system that is stratified and uses campaign contributions and lobbying to ensure that the politicians do the bidding of the companies. So these are the building blocks of the analysis we'll explore in this series on Who Rules America. The argument is simple but hard for many Americans to comprehend because many of us want to believe the myths we learned in school that make us feel superior to other countries and other peoples. This has been called American exceptionalism. Many in America believe that God created this country as the greatest country on earth, and that's what makes it so special.
You really have to start with that as a basis for how the United States was founded.
Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz is one leader of America's indigenous people, the first Americans.
They were the ones to be eliminated because it was their land that was wanted, not even their labor, like in Latin America. The indigenous people were enslaved, made it as a peon. But was New Zealand and Australia. Simply wiping them out and taking their land. So if they weren't included, they were to be eliminated.
And so questions about the custodians of real power and who rules America lead back to debates on how to remake power, how to challenge its distribution, and make it more transparent and accountable. These are the issues that the Occupy Wall Street movement is raising as it challenges institutional power in an attempt to revive grassroots democracy. David DeGraw explains Occupy's origins.
I mean, it was like such a confluence of events. Everything was moving in this direction. You know, I was looking around the world. You know, there was protests happening in Egypt, and then it moved to, you know, the Arab Spring, Tunisia, and all throughout Europe, came back, and it was just a matter of time before it hit the United States. And really, if you look, the occupations globally, you know, they became like the thing to do. So it's just a natural progression for it to show up here. I feel like it shows up here because, you know, even though wealth is so concentrated, you know, the people have a media system where they're so propagandized and they feel isolated. But, you know, Occupy shows that people are, you know, not suffering alone. They're coming out and
that's number
raising
one
awareness
in the world,
and change the national discourse.
The movement is up against powerful forces with large budgets and the backing of police forces and the political establishment. While these activists are on the front lines of the fight for a people-ruled America, many of its people share the same hope.
You have a sense of class being important in this country, that there being like an upper class, working class?
Absolutely. You know, I'm a waitress at a very nice restaurant, and it's very clear to me, you know, what my role is and who I am, you know, and you can tell just from the dialogue that I have with people, you know.
Got a few more of those stickers right there. If somebody wants one that I meet on the road, I'll give it to them.
Recently, I talked to a general manager of a fairly large business in our town, and
so today I'm going to be working
when I mentioned
on this,
that I was going to a public school, you know, I got kind of an eye roll, and oh yeah, my tax dollars pay for that.
This is my project today.
Do you feel like there's all this resentment against working people, kind of feeling like they don't deserve what little they're getting?
Absolutely, and especially, you know, with the recent attacks on public sector employees, like on teachers, and, you know, people are saying, you know, they don't deserve those benefits. We all don't get those benefits, so they don't deserve.
My other ones have a bad leak, especially that side. The left side is leaking really bad.
For everyone instead of taking it away.
So I'm going to work on that today, guys.
You know, when I hear you talking,
what do you think, guys?
You know, I realize there's such a bigger picture here.
Precious?
Than most people.
Precious or no precious?
That we have, you know, a country where the dream is slipping away for so many people. And they
blind in my eye, gotta put it back in the bag.
They don't feel like they can do anything, they can achieve anything, they can make a difference.
Guys, that's my project today. I got all my supplies that I should need, my tools, my container to put bolts and stuff right there. That way I don't lose my screws and bolts, whatever.
It's just like,
keep them inside of that container.
You know, I'll
my
work on
rags
achieving my dream tomorrow, but today,
all my stuff that I need.
you know, I have to. I have to
challenge myself to get that done today.
I have to go to work, and I have to try to squeeze a couple hours of sleep in, and then, you know.
So anyways,
it's
that's my project.
Now you're here at this conference.
And I'm glad we got that project done yesterday. Got the speaker going.
Professors
glad
and
Mike
experts
says
and
it's
leaders.
loud.
And how do you feel about
show you
this
the amp
idea
that I got.
that people have to get together to make a difference?
I think it's
the amp right there.
I feel so blessed to be able to be here with people like that, because I want to learn, you know, somebody had, you know, had said to me, well, why don't you leave where you are? And I don't think that's the answer. I think that it's my job as somebody who cares about these things, to learn from these people, to learn from these brilliant minds, and so I can take this back.
Then I want to hang this sign
and
right underneath,
and show them and explain to them
Biden's
we don't have
mask space on the outside of the bus, but I want to get some stainless steel screws so they don't get all rusty. But check it out.
Aaron expresses the hopes of many ordinary Americans who want to reshape the nature of power so that the 99%,
I want to put that right on the
not just the
passenger
1%,
door,
can
right
rule.
underneath
But as you
Biden's
can
head.
see and hear, it's not a battle she feels she is winning. Perhaps that's why she, like
You know,
many,
he had his shit
want
in
to
his
know who
garage,
rules
right?
America.
His paperwork. But that, it was okay for him to have it in there. That was a cool spot to have. But yeah,
The question of who rules America has been debated throughout America's own history. It was originally raised and answered to some degree by the American Revolution
yeah,
in
you
the
guys should go
1770s
check out ENDEVR.
that fought for independence
That
from the British
is
Crown,
a
so that
mind-blowing
Americans, at least some Americans,
channel. Go
could
check
rule
him out. Go
themselves, or
subscribe
at least
to
they
him
hoped they
and
could.
share.
We're at Columbia
It's
University
an eye-opener.
with
I'm glad I ran into
Foner,
that channel.
historian and writer,
But yeah, this is
and
more
teacher
update that I've
here
done.
at
Oh, check
University
this out
for a
here.
long period of time.
I think what is unusual today is two things. One, the degree of
Something
inequality.
that one of my
Never
friends' mother
before has
gave
the
me.
very, very top, the 1%, had so much of the national income and wealth in its own hands. And, you know, so that the gap is greater than ever before. And secondly, you know,
Just
Occupy
put that
Wall
up
Street is
with
not
double-sided
primarily a
sticky
movement of farmers, of laborers. It doesn't have the same base. People need to learn history. That's part of our job, to know that this issue has been around for a long time. There was nothing un-American about
So I'm
raising the
working on
question
where
of
how my
economic
little kitchen's
plutocracy,
gonna be
economic
right there. There's my
inequality. It's
stainless
as
steel
American as apple pie.
sink there, and that's
you know,
my
I
water
think that the
tank
Occupy
right
Wall
there.
Street people are, you know,
And,
legitimate heirs of a long and
I think
venerable
there should be
tradition in
plenty
this
of
country.
water for myself.
Today, the
right?
activists of
And
Occupy
then I'm
Wall
gonna
Street
use
are
this
continuing
one,
the fight
the
for
blue
independence
one,
and
to
economic
fill the water
justice
up
from
and bring it
domination
back
by a
and
small
fill the
elite
tank up,
in the
right?
name of
And
the
I have my
majority,
dolly there
the
to
99% of
jug
America.
back and forth.
I do think what's been brilliant about the Occupy Wall Street
There's my water
movement
bucket
is the framing of the
right
1%
now, fresh
versus
water.
99%. And I think,
And then I use a belt.
Undemocratic power structure.
I use
that
a
goes
belt
across political,
to secure
economic,
this
social,
washer.
and cultural lines.
What kind
So
of
it won't
impact
fall
has Occupy
over.
Wall Street had in raising basic
And
questions
that
about the
is
nature
my
of
shower
power
pan
in America?
right
We asked
there.
sociologist Stanley Aronowitz.
And I'll
It's
show you on a minute
has
how
an
that
impact
works.
on perception.
But I'm
It
still,
has changed the
I'm
conversation.
still cleaning
The
and
question
straightening up things
is
and
whether
try
or
to
not
figure
it
out
will
where
be
I
able to
pretty
change
much want
policy.
everything to be.
And the argument that I is
Still in
that
the
it should not
working
worry
mode.
about changing policy in the short run.
But,
the only way to change policy in the long run
anyways, this is
is
the
going to be
back
to create
area. The shell that
movement. And
goes
in order
on
to
to
create that
the
bigger movement, what
motor
it has to do
and
is it has to ask the question, what kind of a life do we want to lead? What is the good life? What is the vision of the way in which we want to live?
And then there's a big old fan that I use.
Transgender. It's made very, very cool through the media. Through TikTok, through Reddit, through Tumblr, through Instagram, through Facebook.
David DeGraw coined the 99% 1% phrase. He was an early Occupy organizer.
All
He
of my
explained
tools back
why Who
there.
Rules America remains an urgent
I'm
issue.
still working on that.
So
I'm
you
trying
have
to
big
condense
banks
all
and
the
concentrated
tools
wealth that's just
and
rigged the
bumps
political
and stuff like that
process.
into smaller
You know, and
containers.
investigating it, we have
So I
a
can have
country
more
where
room.
U.S. millionaire
So,
households
yeah.
have $46 trillion
So I got
of
my
wealth.
piggy back
It's
here.
just a mind-boggling number. So, you know, over the past
I have my
generation,
piggy back
all the
here
wealth has
hanging
gone
out.
to the top. You know,
And the
really it's
planner.
1/10 of 1%,
Have the
more than
snoop
1%. But,
investigating.
you know, breaking it down even further, you have
Keep an eye
400
on
people who
things.
have as much
I'll
wealth
film
as
the bus.
155 million Americans.
Flags
So that's
flopping
400
around,
people who
guys.
have as much wealth as half the population.
So yeah, I
The
still have
seeds
more
of the
work
battle
to do.
that many of the
Yeah, I got my
occupiers
AC
see as a
working.
new American revolution
I'm
is
gonna
not really
paint the
new, but deeply
cover that
rooted in
goes
the
on it. So
unresolved
I'm still
history of
working on that.
conflict in the United States between those who
And
own
then I
control
want to
its
also,
resources
when I
and
cover
those
that
who want
cover,
economic
I want to cover,
equality.
I want to paint this cover also. So I want both of them to match.
And that's a funny
So, anyways, but that's another project for another day. But, yeah, I'm condensing things down. There's my bed frame up there. And got it up there in storage because remember I was working on the AC and I didn't want nothing, the bed to be in the way and water leak and all.
In other words,
So
the people
now
who began the
it'll
struggle
be
against
soon.
Great
I'll
Britain
put the bed
were
back in.
merchants in Boston and New York, plantation owners
yeah.
in Virginia. You know, most of the
AC's
founders of
working
Virginia are
like a
slave
champ.
owners. But what happens
And,
is, as the struggle intensifies,
so
they
anyways,
have to generate
my spare
support
tire
among
right
ordinary
there.
people. And when you do that, you
I wanna
break
try to
open the
keep my
political
tire
system
inside.
and you open the door for very,
I
very
want it
different
outside.
kinds of
I don't want
demands.
somebody slashing
Slaves
the
start
tire,
demanding
they
their
get
own
pissed
freedom.
off, you know.
Women and
So
Native
it's better
Americans
safe
start
that I
demanding
keep it
greater
inside the
equality.
bus.
So what happens at the beginning
So
when
anyways, that's about it,
a
guys,
more privileged class begins the
that I have
resistance,
today.
that doesn't necessarily tell you how the whole process is going to take place.
So
This
that was my
conflict
biggest
between
update.
the 1%,
Let's
actually
get
the
the speakers running.
0.001%, and the 99% had its echoes here in the home
glad
of
I did
America's
that.
anti-colonial
Oh
uprising.
yeah, and I did some
in the
small
back
tedious
streets of
stuff. Let me show
Boston,
you again,
where
guys.
Freedom
Sorry.
Trail today commemorates a
So
massacre.
here we go. Oh, there I am.
And it
There I
raised
am.
these
I'm back,
questions of equality in the
So
society.
anyways,
Not just the status of
boiling
women in
hot.
American life.
So I
It
put the screen
unleashed
cover
a
back on
kind
it.
of
And because
struggle for equality among
Andy
all
changed
sorts of
out
groups,
new
which
wiring
continued
and
long after the
stuff,
revolution was over.
put everything fresh.
Listen, my children, and you
Remember,
shall
we
hear
checked all the
of
wiring in the
midnight
bus,
ride
so
of Paul Revere. That's
you know,
one of the
so that
most
was one
famous
that we
poems
changed out
of
to
the
be
American
safe.
Revolution. And here
And
we
then on
are
the very
in front
back,
of the statue of Paul
this
Revere,
panel was
the
missing
man
back
who
there. We
alerted
took it
all
off
Massachusetts
so
to
I
the
can
British
run the
troops
AC
coming
lines
into their
that go
communities.
all the way
We're
up
on the
there and
Freedom
come out right
Trail
there.
in Boston,
So I had
where
to
the
take the
American
panel off
Revolution
back
is
there
remembered.
in
Well,
order
what
to
kind
run
of a
the line
revolution
up.
was it?
And
What
so
actually
now I
happened
put that
here in
panel
Boston
back
back
on,
in the
so now it looks
1700s?
back to
What have we
normal,
learned
nice and neat.
since then?
And
Thousands of tourists and
so
students visit these
anyways,
revolutionary
and then there's
monuments
my
every
pan
day,
right there
but most
to let
have
the
only a
oil
foggy
drip in.
idea of what really happened
So,
and tend to
yep.
repeat the
So that's
mythologies
about it,
that are
guys,
taught in
and,
their schools.
Here was
that's
Paul
all that I
Revere.
have that I
Paul
did
Revere
update
was one of the great revolutionary heroes. So you
like I
kids,
said, today's the day to work on the bus
Yes, we are.
Can I ask you a question?
and get this
We're doing
part
a little
done.
TV program here.
And,
Who was Paul Revere? What was this all about? Do you know?
Let's see, guys.
Midnight
I'm
ride.
gonna see if I can.
Midnight Ride.
To warn the British are coming.
Did you know that he was a very rich businessman, a silversmith here in Boston, and that he wanted to be in the Continental Army and they wouldn't let him in? Did you know that?
Didn't know that.
I know that. Did you know that in Boston there was this merchant class, business leaders, the 1%, who were really running the whole show in many ways, and that the people were not as involved because back then there were slaves, there were indentured servants, there were a lot of people who didn't have a say in what was going on. Did you know about that?
No idea. I didn't know anything about Paul Revere.
Anyways, again, guys, go check out ENDEVR. Guys, you have to go watch this video. I know it's long,
Massachusetts for
but
many,
it's
many, many years,
beautiful,
and has
and
followed,
it explains
the
to
various
you all
debates about our
what's
history.
really
What was
going
it
on.
about this revolution?
Knowledge is
was it a
powerful.
popular uprising,
So
or was it sort
let's
of led
keep
by
our brains
elites
fresh
here in Boston?
and be aware
Well,
of what our
both were true. There were
government has
popular
been doing
elements.
to us and will continue
Ordinary
doing to
people
us
did resent
until
the
we put a
British.
stop to it.
Ordinary
Okay,
people
guys?
did participate in riots.
But I
and
want you all
boycotts.
to have a blessed
But
day.
there was a 1%
And,
back then. The
I'm
leaders
gonna
of the
come back
revolution
live again.
both led it
and,
and channeled it.
I think I figured
They
out
were
how to let
certainly
people
not
up on
above
the
using
panel.
words like liberty and freedom
anyways,
to deflect and
I'm gonna
distract
let
people
this one
from their
in
own discontents in
and
the
get
colonies.
myself ready
And their
for
own
this
interests.
project,
I mean,
and then
the business class
I'll
of
bring some
Boston
people up on the
didn't
panel.
want more
See if I
taxes
get
on
it
their
going.
products. They wanted to compete
All right,
with
peace
British
out, guys.
goods. They felt they shouldn't
Thanks
be taxed.
for stopping by,
and as a
everyone.
result, there was
Appreciate
the original Tea Party here in Boston.